I like to express it in, in two words, maybe one in a can. The first is bringing some order, into the way a few things um, were being done. Um, to give an example, there was a bit of the marketing of, gold. Besides those who were the businesses that were structured, structured like Anglo Gold and others, was a bit more orderly, vis-a-vis, okay, on the whole value chain from production through exports, the handling of the forex by Bank of Ghana. But if you compared, however you view Galamsey, its destruction and everything, at least the produce, ought to be handled, in a better way. And when there is some confusion around an economic situation, obviously people take advantage. So what I mean by bringing some order, I'm using that as an example, is setting up of the gold board within a very short period, making sure that you have, like Cocoa Board, designated, intermediaries that handle the products. So you have a very formal structure to the gold board, and then from the gold board to the central bank, which is the custodian of all our forex. So it's no accident that once you restore that order, in addition to clearing the forex reserves, as His Excellency has explained, the 8 major ones, then you are bringing some order into the operations of a vital part of the economy. Otherwise, then it would affect, either we are a mining country, so we have lithium, we have other. You don't want, people getting in and doing things in a disorderly manner. So that yields positive results, which is reflected in the reserve, which is reflected in the forex reserves, showing a strong inflow. Of course, there are external factors like the weakening of the cedi at various points, of the dollar at various points in time, and we know those of us who follow finance that the main competitor besides the strong currencies are the euro, the yen, to the dollar is gold, because it's used as bullion, as as reserves.
And gives you a lot of stability as well.
Stability as well, yes. So that is one factor by way of explanation, as well the rapid nature of the other one, which I like to use our own language to say Sankofa. If you need to restore order, you're either going to devise, the means of doing it newly, or you go into your arsenal and pluck something from your past. After all, this is not an entirely new government in the sense of ruling. So to use another example, you saw the way in which the Minister for Finance moved swiftly to take control of government funds, which were all over, Harvard again. And that is true, what we call the Treasury Single Accounts, which was an element of the PFL reforms, which the word GIFMIS has come to symbolize. GIFMIS is a system, but the acronym is catchy. So there's an entire PFL reforms. And that simply says that, when government, the Ministry of Finance, allocates resources, right, it doesn't allocate the resources, say, on the eve of payments. Some payments, because of the relation, especially in electronic age, instructions can go and things can. But traditionally, until we are able to go all electronic, what was done was part of the money is advanced to ministries, departments, and agencies, MMDAs, government agencies generally, and the monies are often kept for a period, say a quarter or a month. Otherwise you affect, smooth operations. Okay. That money belongs to government. So if you leave it, with banking institutions and everybody, they will just use it. Sometimes, ironically, to buy your own treasury bills, and the treasury bill rates, goes up, other interest rates go up. So again, moving swiftly with what we were implementing called the Treasury Single Account, brought some order again into that system. And that translates in the drop in the interest rates.
And I see that your protege, who is now the finance minister, Dr. KCL Atoforsin, is, if you look at what the main opinion is and the narrative from stakeholders, is doing well. But then that takes us back to the subject of perhaps the sort of economic management, the policy intent of austerity, just to ensure that you do a lot of realignment in relation to how the allocations have been done prior to 2025. So what was the key policy intent, especially for this budget?
Well, let's say there are two parts of it. There is the part of policy that has to do with the state of the economy. We are defaulted, no question about that. We cannot quarrel. We had huge arrears to pay, particularly in the energy sector, right? So that's what we are inheriting. Again, Sankofa, you remember single spine? You remember, subsidies unpaid, same energy sector. Then you remember the breach in gas supply from Nigeria as a result of the disruption in the West Africa gas pipeline. That was also right at the onset, of the Meles Mahama administration. So again, you go back, what did we do then? So that's what the experience is all about. So on that factor in terms of the Ministry of Finance's moves and stability, I mentioned it yesterday. But again, there were quite a number of, so we needed to go back to resolve the crisis in which the economy, some payments were made as a result of the Treasury Single Account and other fiscal policies to quieten the pension sector. We still have, as we speak, it's in China talking to the bilaterals, which is China, one of the last stages which is left, which is a legacy we inherited from that, what I'm describing. So the success in handling some of those things, not fully, but progressively, also, translated both in credits, to the minister and to economic policy generally, driven by cabinet led by His Excellency. And you could see the president himself, highlighting more of the medium-term strategy in terms of energy. What are we going to do? To get out of the situation. Part of it is to bring back the oil companies that left, and others. So there's the short-term measures that you take, but there's the medium-term measures also that you take, which, expectations are very important in managing an economy. So if there's a problem and you give a signal that have a solution to it, it brings a bit more confidence. And as you can see, it's reflected in the ratings, B-, from Jock status, CCC, where we were.
Especially from Fitch and Standard & Poor's.
Exactly, yes. And so that is one way of it. But you don't take your eyes off the ball. Now the focus is in the medium term. But in terms of austerity, remember that the combination of all what I've been talking about is the IMF program, which was being derailed. Seriously, I think the mission, I'm not saying it, the staff mission said it, but they were happy by the time they left that the same measures we are talking about, impacted the structural measures and the benchmarks that we had to meet, which were being derailed, right? And hopefully, July, the board will be meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
And,
all right.
Yeah.
So a key consideration that has to be made is what has been experienced in the stability in Forex. And so those Forex stabilities, and you've mentioned the dollar,
Exactly.
you've mentioned all of them. And so
but you need a medium term.
Yeah, sure. So my question,
Yes.
so my question is, if you take a look at what the literature review is, and then what the concern, whether it's coming from academia, those who are in supply chain, very much involved in sourcing materials, whether it's for industry or other sectors like value addition in agriculture, the concern they have is fundamentally the structure of the economy has not changed. So what policy initiatives from the short to medium term would then influence the structure of the economy so that the Forex stability we're seeing or the non-volatility will again improve or be stable to a certain point?
I think when they talk about the structure of the economy not changing, there's a real sector. There's a fact that we're a commodity exporting country.
Which is true?
Which is true, yes. There's a fact that we have been exporting raw, as we were just, discussing. So whether you bring order to how you, export and price gold or not, it is still exporting primary commodity. Again, both the manifesto and His Excellency, with respect to minerals and agriculture, have emphasized that we'll be moving into setting up farmer services, centers, which would be actually like the off-takers for cocoa farmers, but it would now incorporate value addition in terms of storage. How do you say you are adding value? Now the rains are good. If we don't set up such mechanisms, the food will rot. That's the opposite of good rains, right? Bumper harvest is rotting. If you store them, if you process them in ways in which they can be stored, then it helps, then you are changing. Now, His Excellency is chairing, if you remember, the Export Council, which has linked some of these measures. The same, okay, let me just backtrack a bit. The same with gold. There's talk about refining, gold, producing, bullions, which BOG is already doing, and all those sort of things. So when you do that, you are changing the structure of even the real sector, or you intend to change the structure of even the real sector, right? So these are some pointers which I like, my friends in academia, and I say my friends because I also teach, to watch progress. There was a 120-day promise, yeah. The Honorable Valerie Sawyer is the one who is monitoring not just the 120-day, she's monitoring with the team what are the other promises that we made into the medium
so that you
term.
don't go off target?
So we don't go off target, so we are, prompt with the things that we say we want to do. When you come to the soft sector, I'm afraid the structure has started changing. So as I said, if your soft sector, which involves export services and the rest, you don't control your currency well. You don't control the way in which trading is done well. You don't control that buying and selling. If you don't change your tax system, as we want to do with the ITAS, with the removal of, the various levies and the rest, it will affect the soft sector of the economy. So yes, there are structural changes. And I like to also point them to the fact that we did start changing some of these things structurally. We had a debt repayment account, which is the second part, the common expression from the Constitution. It's in the Constitution. Why was it stopped? That's the main reason we defaulted. So the fact that we've defaulted, we should not focus too often on the failures, but that there was a remedy, which enabled us to pay the first sovereign bond, issued by His Excellency before bond and refinance it, and so why were these measures? We started a stabilization fund, which was to help us a counter-cyclical, measure. So I would like the conversation, frankly, for governments. What is it that's positive about, one government or the other? And in our case, we implemented a lot of structural measures with the assistance of World Bank and others. So I think if they would, point to some of the positive things that have happened in the past, why they were stopped, because success is on sustainability, sustaining the reforms. Yes.
Because that part of development also need to go in tandem with infrastructure. And the policy that was started when you were finance minister was to make sure that state enterprises or entities of state were able to borrow and then implement projects or invest in capital projects, like what we're seeing in Terminal 3 for the airport, on their cash flow and balance sheet. How are we going to have that perhaps better done in this administration?
Yes, there's a lesson in both success and in failure. Again, if the model, was changed, and that's what we call the smart borrowing or the self-financing policy or project financing, right? When you talk about state-owned enterprises, the operative word there is enterprise. They are one of apart from them and other, descriptions like a company which ECG and others have, they are profit making, right? And government as the owner, which set up the entity, should expect to get dividends. They should make profit and pay government dividends. Some of them do, right? Cocoa Board, that's why its name, Gold Board. They are commercial. They are allowed to make profit compared to a ministry, department, or agency, education, health. They don't. Yeah, they may break even. They may sell a few things, but generally they are not there to make profit. So the principle we had was, if the entity has difficulties or it's not being operated efficiently, as we are seeing with some of them, at least they must cover their costs of doing business, right? And that's where the principle comes from. That don't expect to go and borrow, right? And then the taxpayer issuing a guarantee, which is the one who would ultimately have to pay.
Will have to take your liabilities.
Exactly, the contingent liabilities, which is what we have under the IMF program. So at a minimum, the principle we did, a short one, we can have a discussion, lengthy discussion on it, is to say that flows, particularly the forex flows, particularly those which are taxes, right, go and earn your income. Taxes are levied. So we ring-fence those, flows, whether from the product, from taxes or whatever, and we escrowed it, right? When you escrow means you draw a ring around it. Bank of Ghana gave the promise that this will be paid because they are in forex. And so when we brought in African Development Bank and others, they realized that, hey, this money can pay for the project. You don't have to go and wait and borrow or the SOE guarantee. So that's how come we did a number of projects. It actually started with, the pipeline, which brought the gas, the CDB loan. And then the gas processing plant itself is supposed to be self-financing from exporting power after we use the gas to produce, right? And then we followed up with Terminal 3. And I must say, Tema Port expansion is also self-financing from the shipping use and the rest. So that's the innovation, to be sure.
So my question is, what's the thoughts on the table of you, the advisors of government on the economy, on that policy?
On that policy, it has proven. It's giving us infrastructure. It has expanded the infrastructure. For example, the airport has been expanded in a substantive way. Remember, I started with refurbishment of Terminal 2, and then we new 1, 3. So if something has worked, yes, it may not all be favorable. Are there things that need to be improved? But you continue them and you enhance on them. So that is, what we mean by we'll do some more. In
the current government, is there what we typically have known to be, of course, it's an advisory team, we say the economic management team?
I think
is there a body
an
like
announcement.
that?
Yes, that's always been. No, it's been with our governments and there are other things, but I wouldn't want to preempt. This is something.
Do we have one since January that has been put in place?
Oh, you set up these mechanisms. They are made up of ministers. They are made up of various eminent people. They are made up of all kinds of. There are usually two structures: the advisory team and the EMT. So now that all those things have been done, swearing in and everything, the composition will be reviewed. And I think an announcement is imminent. I don't want to preempt.
Okay.
This is the preserve
so
of His Excellency.
Who will be heading the John Mahama II economic management team?
I like to reserve that comment, to the.
So it certainly means that there's a thought on it.
No, of course, there's been thinking on it.
So who'll be chairing it?
What I'm saying is that I like to leave that to at least my boss, who is the chief of staff, at the minimum, or.
So it means the finance minister is a key component or.
If we go to history, yes, the finance minister.
Okay. And then who else?
Of course,
the
advises, I'm sorry, I'm saying that if we are discussing the whole
Ghana Chamber of Commerce, who else is there?
We also had a expanded, team. Sorry, the expanded consultation, which came in the form of breakfast meetings,
yes,
or some other,
So when will that announcement be made? Preemptively, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or within the next of the John Mahama II, Nana Jino Pukwajiman EMT?
Well, if it had been part of the synopsis that was given to me, I would have had a more concrete answer for you by private consulting with the chief
But
of staff.
one will be announced.
I'm not aware.
But one will certainly will have to be announced.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, structure. But let me just make a quick point. It's not just about financing, the method of financing we were talking about previously. It's about changing the structure. We spoke about the structure of the economy, right? Where you use infrastructure to create jobs. At the moment, a lot of young people, right, and rightly so, because I entered the public service, are expecting jobs. And everybody is looking to the public sector. They are looking to a civil service. They are looking to, the public service. They are looking to an SOE. That is government to create jobs. But we're also saying that if government changes, let me just make this fast by saying that I can bet that the jobs that Terminal 3 has created, because it's an entirely new terminal, in all probability, and you may want to check, it's larger than Terminal 1 and 2 put together. And there are new jobs, right? The jobs that were created with the cocoros, with rehabilitation of cocoa board, warehouses, and other things. There were a lot of things that were done, would create jobs in the rural areas. So you are also talking about growth, you are talking about value addition, you are talking about the services sector, which is expanding and is the largest here. So that's what I like to add, to one of the goals, for focusing on infrastructure.
Right. And revenue is always important for you to be able to do all this. At the time that the budget was presented, and then also you look at the various tax handles that were announced, the newly introduced or increased, is it ESLA? Is it ESLA?
No, it was a levy.
Okay.
You mean the one that's...
The 1 CD per litre one, that has created the controversy.
Yes.
Why is it that it wasn't announced?
No, I think
there was no thorough stakeholder engagement. You did the advice?
No, listen. What I have to say on that is that, governance is continuous, right? And the budget comes with a lot of measures. But the other ways of also introducing, an economic policy, a social policy or whatever, in between budgets, is to go to Parliament by law. So it's a legitimate means of going to Parliament, if there's an urgency around the issue. So the issue is why, was a particular cost taken out in calculating, the tariff, right? So to give you an example, it's like taking all the costs associated with what we are doing today in terms of, electricity, power, and everything out of your cost structure and pricing your advertisement. You are subsidizing, more or less. You don't have a complete picture. So I think that is what happened. So if this had come to the notice, early, they would have been added to the other measures in the budget at the time it was being read. But you don't also have to wait for another budget. And I have a good example. You mentioned ESLA, right? ESLA came about because we had used $99 to prepare the budget. At the time when Parliament was considering the budget in November, crude oil prices fell to $45, and it kept going down. I think it hit about 35 or 30. We had to go to Parliament with an act after the budget was read. So there are precedents to this thing all the time. So I think the timing was not meant to hide something and read the budget and after. No, after it's a PURC. And the minister said, his SSA has explained, that this is structural. And actually the home for this policy for its ultimate correction is PURC.
And we need the revenue, right? To be able to shore up the...
Yeah, we need the revenue because there's a liability.
For the energy sector.
For liquid fuels, yes. In other words, we are paying for liquid fuels without incorporating it in the...
Based on what you know now, what's the extent of that liability for the energy sector?
I don't have the figures of hand because, because it's a structural one, because it's for liquid fuels which are still being imported, right? Maybe the Minister for Energy would have the right answer in terms of what is the cost that we are building up, which is not covered by the...
And now it's being halted by way of implementation.
It's been suspended. Okay. Because again, we go back to another...
Okay, so it's been suspended.
Yes.
When will it be reintroduced?
For me,
Or because it's been passed,
no,
so it means that it has to be implemented.
No, for me, I like to go structural again, right? Things will take you by surprise in managing an economy. It never ends. The Israeli-Iran war, yes, we knew about Hamas and Israel. It's one example. So if we came today and we said, this has happened, and the announcement came, it crude prices quickly. And that's the reason that what we're talking about had to be suspended. I think we should find more structural, and this is where, from the beginning of our conversation, I'm making the appeal again. Did we put in something from these experiences that you don't control all crises, even your domestic crisis, drought, heavy rainfall, and is there a way, and that is a stabilization fund, which we implemented, which says that when times are good, prepare because the crises are inevitable and they will come. That is another policy which was started, stopped, because the funds were claimed, which again, from our lessons, hopefully, media, academia, and everybody will see the usefulness of some of the, the counter-cyclical measures that, we were. Yeah. And in fact, the debt repayment account comes after you have capped the stabilization fund and take. So it controls two key policies, what we call the counter-cyclical, the fact that there will be crisis, and the important thing is not to wait for the crisis before you are scrambling and actually disrupting the economy. But if you had kept, let's say strategic stocks, as the Minister for Energy and were saying, that we have enough stocks. That's another policy that we implemented for the next 2 months. It means that you are foreseeing some of these crises, and it means that, fuel prices will not go up and whatever. So I think we should rather learn from this and support the structural measures, which His Excellency implemented, which we are reintroducing because they were stopped.
Okay. So if then we know what the experiences have been over the last 2 weeks following the disruptions between Israel and Iran and its effect on oil, and of course we've seen some stability. Just before coming in here, I did the check. It's still under $69 when it comes to the oil prices across all categories of crude. It also means that we should be forward-looking, at least for the remaining part of the year, because we're not out of the wood yet globally. So what's the remedy?
So we should be looking to the futures market. You see, because there's a mechanism. We should be looking at the commodities market, right? Because, yes, remember the diplomacy has now started around Iran, Iraq, President Trump stepped in, Iran and Israel. President Trump stepped in and he says, ceasefire, let's go back to the table. You can't take that for granted. Something can always happen. So again, for me, I think it's be prepared, because crises are inevitable. And that's the philosophy behind, a very seminal policy, like what President Mahama, started. Yeah.
In the
By the way, they are in the Petrol Revenue Management Act. So it goes back to Mills Mahama. Because what I'm talking about, the Stabilization Fund is in the Petrol Revenue Management Act.
Certainly.
Yes. The sinking fund is when you cap the Stabilization Fund that you establish it. And then you also set up the contingency fund, which we used to alleviate some of the problems 10 years ago with the Kwame Nkrumah, fire disaster and flooding. We've had
in 2015.
Exactly. But because we stopped it, we've had bomb, and we were caught pants down 10 years ago.
It means that with the conversations with the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF at the helm of us, especially now that we have a bailout with them, and the commendations and how our indicators are improving, we have a certain idea when we will go back to the bond markets or the capital market. What's the projection?
Yeah, we've already said that. And the fund agrees in principle, pending the final. The decisions by the I keep mentioning the board, because as far as the IMF is concerned, it's not your country team coming here. It's like cabinet taking a decision. The Minister for Finance may have some brilliant ideas and whatever. He has to take it to cabinet, chaired by the president, for it to be. So it's the board, which is going to be meeting in July, that would accept. But in principle, they've agreed that with what we have done so far, and especially with the ratings that seem to be confirming it, we are ripe to open the domestic bond market.
The domestic bond market?
The domestic bond market.
From which quarter?
It's this planning. You don't rush into this. Some planning is taking place already by the Ministry of Finance. I would say at the latest, should the board approve, you may see the policy in the before or in the media review, right? That's what makes it more structural.
So at least we'll see us going back to the domestic bond market.
In all probability.
Okay.
And then
before
with that
September
experience,
or the last quarter.
Yes, and then with that experience, let's say in the short term, but with that experience, and one benefit of that is that government is able to borrow long term again from me and you as citizens. That's why it's domestic. To do infrastructure, we were just talking about infrastructure. Should we borrow for the city element from outside, hard dollars, for the city element, excavation and the rest, for Terminal 3? At least if you have to import some parts, some goods which we do not produce, you can take an external loan. But you can rely on your citizens. And then Terminal 3 will pay for the bond. It will be sustaining. You can be assured because you have a mechanism. It's being channeled towards the long-term financing. So that's what I have to say that. So it's a preparation. There are negotiations taking place with the bilaterals and hopefully before the board. And so with that cleared and with the establishment of the debt management office, which is very important, in between the two openings of the market, or it's ongoing now, in order that we can manage better, then we can think about, a return to the external bond market.
So far, how have we had good conversations with the key stakeholders, whether it's the members of the Paris Club or existing multilateral interested party countries when it comes to external, whether it's concessionary or non-concessionary, and then also those in the private market globally?
I can say with all certainty and confidence that as we speak, the Minister for Finance is engaged in those talks.
Is he overwhelmed with options
of
those key players, if it's on Wall Street or it's various funds in key countries, etc.?
A reminder, when I met the current minister, I met him as a first-timer to Parliament on the Finance Committee of Parliament when I was a deputy and taking care of government business in Parliament. He went through the mill to become the ranking member, which is the equivalent of being the chairman of the Finance Committee. And he became the leader of the House, where a lot of economic issues come in. He was my deputy, right? After that encounter, the following, Mahama term, he became my deputy. So I think that he has some experience, significant experience. In terms of, I was never an MP, so in terms of managing House leadership and things in the House, no, I don't. I've been to Parliament several times. I've interacted with leadership. So I think we can trust that, he has, accumulated a lot of experience, and will be able to handle this job. And so he's on the road working on many of these things ahead of the, and he's engaging he engaged the commercial creditors, if you remember, and then engaged the, he's meeting the bilaterals that are left, and hopefully this has to go to the board, and then,
There are a lot of unions who have been up in arms over existing, or they say ongoing discussions on their conditions of service or other conditions they wanted to enjoy when it comes to their work, and for which they had been, and now we even see suspension and even threats of going back to the issue of strike. How is that going to align with what the projections for expenditure have been, and then what needs to be done to also accommodate their concerns?
For us, history is repeating itself. You remember the strikes associated with single spine, which was also a policy that was carried over.
You inherited.
We inherited much of what they are talking about in terms of agreement on this or that were not negotiated. I mean, they themselves are saying they were negotiated by the former administration.
But government is a continuum.
Of course, yes. But I'm saying that I'm going back to history, and I'm saying that we are beginning to have, a feature of governance where problems are created, by one dispensation for the next dispensation, which seems to be a bit too orderly for ERP SAP solution to single spine and other solutions, and now we are back again talking about, in all cases, that was a terrible legacy that has been left, right? So I would hope that the parties would not continue to leave terrible legacy. Every, if you take arrears, for example, by its nature, you will definitely pass on arrears. But for heaven's sake, why stop, the move to semi-accrual to control arrears better, for a whole 8 years? Why stop ITAS, which is where we would have used automation or digitalization for a government that was talking about digitalization a lot for a whole 8 years when the customs system was set up. The domestic system has not been set up to provide that linkage to strengthen. So to Labour, I would say that we have always had a good and cordial working relations with Labour, right? And therefore, these issues would receive the necessary attention. They are legacy issues which will receive. But I'd like to remind them that one of the structural changes that we made with the petrol revenue, with the Public Financial Management Act, is for government to complete negotiations for the ensuing year by April ending. And we'll return to that. It is that which will avoid all these hiccups. You only go and agree with Labour going to elections in September, thereabout, because you haven't, complied, with that provision. And I think that when we talk about structure, they need to change where this conversation, started. Academics saying let's have structural changes, value addition, and whatever. This is already a law which we enacted, which should have been implemented. And so let's rather look forward to overcoming the problem now at hand and then have a more orderly way of negotiations so that by the time you are reading the budget or you even finish, before you finish, implementing the budget guidelines, you would have had all the numbers, to include in the budget. I think that is more sustainable.
All right. Which on the expenditure item of government gives you headache? Name 3.
I'm not a minister.
Yeah, sure. But
I think that
you're the advisor
in the last
when it comes to the economy.
Yes. The arrears, our ability, the defaults, why we should default. And the difference with the current default, or inability to pay debt, it has affected Ghanaians through the haircut. If you compare it to HIPIC, it didn't affect Ghanaians. We rather got flows from it. Yes. So that's what I would say.
So that's 1. 2?
I said arrears, debt.
Okay.
That's
Those are two main issues. All right. Yes. But if there's something that gives you hope in terms of how the resurgence has been, the response from the market, and again, the market will be, whether it's the domestic consumer market or those who are investors in instruments, etc., what would that be? What in the political narrative we call honeymoon period? Because it looks to have been extended for the government.
Based on resource and coming clean with what we took over, so that nobody will say that we had been saying it during the campaign. Nobody will say that you promised that you resolve everything in 3 months or whatever. We'll come clean, right? But looking forward, for me, is preparing. You see, we are still a vulnerable economy, right? We were a low-income country. We have become a lower middle-income country. It's for policies to mature. So for me, it is what are we preparing for the medium term? The eyeball and saying, this is likely to happen because it has happened before, and preparing for them before they happen. The Bagri Dam will be open pretty soon. So it's not just about mobilization. It's about a contingency fund. It's about those whose farms will be destroyed. Compensation that must be paid to them. So mechanisms like the stabilization fund, the contingency fund, and whatever, countries call it in different ways. But the one expression economists always use is counter-cyclical policy. It means that there's a cycle, right? Counter-cyclical means that there's a cycle which occurs. It may be occurring, you may be predictable. The rains we can predict, some you cannot predict, but they will occur. So you need measures. Okay. That's a counter. Measures that are counter, that will counter those Yes, and that's what
you know Gen Zs, right? Gen Zs,
Gen Zs,
the
yes.
young generation, those who are, they have a language. So I'll ask you in Gen Z language.
Oh, sorry.
What's up? What's up with the 24-hour policy?
It's going on.
Okay.
It's a very thoughtful policy. 24-hour is not just about, some aspects are going on, right? Street lighting, there are a lot of changes are going to, because without power stability, all those things. So those may seem ordinary, but they are making sure that power flows continuously 24 hours is in a way. Making sure that in the night there will be power to minimize crime and other things. Those are in the works. The repairs of roads, you can see resurfacing, for example, the road to my church, which is the Shaman Road at the junction at Sakumono, has been paved. But there's a structural part. There's a one that would heavy part of the economy, and that is what the CNC has promised, that the work is being done on. Yes. I envisage that, I think as has been said, going to the media review, some of the approvals have been given, and so the team led by my senior good friend Guzitano, they're at work, and I think pretty soon work.
All right. And the president, His Excellency, also monitors that. You gave me your book, so I've read the preface and the foreword, and then also try to glance through. I'll ask you two questions on that, where we can find this on the bookshelves. But importantly, I have a number of messages. This one is coming from, and it's in response to the interaction we've had so far. This one is coming from Ejay Boating, who says that I'm a businessman, and then also I do a lot of supply chain activities. You go to the ministries, departments, and agencies, and they are not spending. Ask the former finance minister why. So you're not spending. You are not.
We are not
procurement.
No,
you know how the procurement was
I know what it means, but it's too generic to say we are not spending. Salaries are being paid.
Okay.
Many government expenditures are being met. The critical one is supplies, with respect to supplies and some arrears. And I think the minister has said, that there's an audit which is ongoing, and he was expecting the report to come out in July. I know that some of the work is going on, very seriously, to see. And I'll leave that to the minister. I don't want to preempt the minister, even if I'm knowledgeable about certain things. But I can assure the gentleman that, yes, that aspect, spending would have been tantamount to spending on things which eventually we'll get to know, where there were some issues, with them. And that's why audits is a normal feature. So a little patience. The minister will definitely come and say something about this.
Okay. And this one is from Prosper Kwaku, who says, I should ask you, when will the mid-year budget be read? Even though he's not the finance minister, he's the advisor. Ask him.
Oh, it's statutory. It must be read by the end of July. That's statutory. Again, we put it in the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. And another condition we did was that previously, it was a bit loose. So if you didn't have a supplementary budget, you don't have to go to Parliament with a mid-year review. Now we are saying a mid-year review is a mid-year review. It shouldn't have much to do with revising the budget. So whether you're going to revise the budget or not, go and present an accounting. And this is something that we implemented. Again, we started, right, even before it became law. I went to Parliament every year. Dr. Dufo went to Parliament every year, And I think because it's law, that's how come the, past administration was also doing it.
All right. And so we're winding up our conversation. You have this good book. You are known as the second father of taxes, apart from Atamils, VAT. You have great experiences in its implementation. So you've rightly captured your new book. Of course, you are the author, Seth Terkper. Well, you say VAT in Africa, the Ghana experience. Why is this important for not only Ghana, but economies like ours?
First of all, it's important for the students I teach. I've been teaching. So for the students I teach, for my fellow academics, and for professionals, those like the accounting firms and the rest, to say that one, three goals. One, it shows, the structure of the tax, how it is administered. Two, it shows the distortions, particularly the number of levies we have used, to distort the VAT regime, which sadly, some were taxes that were replaced by the VAT. So what we are doing is just going back instead of, refining the VAT system. And then thirdly, it gives a bit of history, for us to know that, VAT resulted in the Kumi-Preku. The Preku demonstrations that they call them, the big one being, Kumi-Preku. So we give a bit of the history within context of the ERP sub-tax policies, as you said, led by, Mr. Tuahoe, Professor Mills, and some of my senior colleagues in the accounting profession. This is the second book, actually. The first one was general, but this one is for, and that's because almost every African country now has a VAT. And almost every African country is repeating some of the successes and failures of the VAT regime in Ghana. So reading it, I would hope that our brothers and sisters from other African countries, will read the principles and then see what has gone right or wrong with the Ghana system and share from Ghana's experience, whether to continue with policy measures that they are implementing or retract on some of them as we have started doing. Yeah.
Now, my last question then will be to you on, if you take a look at how well the indicators have done, and then the important narrative and the accolades, and then also the reaction of the market, both domestic and external. If we should be on this trajectory till the end of the financial year, what does it mean for key indicators and then also policy alignment for industry, particularly capital expenditure and then agriculture?
I think the minister and the president have been pointing, and the one thing about the president, immediately Iran and Israel. He came public and said, I've already directed the minister and the minister of Finance and Energy and other ministers, to evaluate this and see how it will affect. That's how proactive, want to be. And so with this kind of proactivity, with the restoration of the counter-cyclical measures and the rest, the important thing is to sustain the measures which are giving us good results, in order that we can, if possible, improve on them or prepare for crisis and all those sort of things which I've been talking about. So I see, a trajectory, with policy measures, and this is why I ask for patience, with some of the policy measures. Counter policy measures are such that, because they are disruptive to the economy, sometimes it takes some tough decision making, to stop them, to reverse them, or at least to make sure that they do not, become, a part of the economy. We still have some challenges. We mentioned debt, we mentioned arrears and the rest. But I believe that with the same fortitude that we have been working so far, we would be able to surmount some of these challenges.
Okay, where can we get these?
And they will be in most bookshops,
okay.
Particularly the university bookshops, EPP, the EPP, they will be there, some, and so I think there will be a little advert to this.
Okay.
But we expect that to put them in all, bookshops nationwide as much as possible. And I'm hoping that it will make, the reading list, for students.
Okay. Great having you in the studio. Key takeaways, we expect to go back into the bond market, but particularly the thinking right now based on the indicators, domestic bond market.
Yes, which policy has been announced
soon
already.
Could mean to at least by close of the year. And then more importantly, at least we know when it comes to all the things, when it comes to how stable the economy has been, especially the CD against the major trading currencies. You're saying that it's both domestic and external.
Yes.
Okay.
And it takes measures. It takes prudent measures, which we have. Yeah.
And then you bring back the one CD on a liter tax handle when?
Let me quote this. Let me quote the Minister for Energy. we are looking at the situation because, again, it's the second suspension, implementation. So once, the indices, show, maybe we would.
All right.
An announcement will be imminent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seth Terkper, the presidential advisor on the economy, spending some time with us. He's written a new book, particularly for all those who are taxation students and then law of taxation students. Please, you can take some keen interest. VAT in Africa, the Ghana experience. Seth E. Terkper. What's the E for? Emmanuel?
Yeah, Emmanuel.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you very much for passing through.
You're most welcome.
And that'll be it for the show. And you know that we have the latest sports headlines for you right here up next. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching.
I won't quit the opesa woba me yaseno, na yasena mi frantoma. Ubo media ya for hene count, baby this year, me ya baby this year pa. The opesa woba me yaseno, na yasena mi frantoma. Ubo media ya for hene count, baby this year, me ya baby this year pa. Ade American, ade ameti. Yase macha wo kwem na so mempere. Time on call you minim, ubi ansu be. Ubi enya ni